What a beautiful reminder of why we're actually sitting in this room together to go all in. My name is Patrick Thompson. I'm not Doug. I'm not, I didn't go through a transformation over the week, but I am one of your guests for the Global Missions Conference, and I am excited not to just be here at Crosslife, but I'm excited to be at East Campus. I pastor a church in New York City. Our family moved there 11 years ago. I'll tell you more about that journey in a moment, but we worship in a facility very similar to this. We meet in a public school right across from Midtown Manhattan, right along the East River. Our people are gathering right now. We were setting up this morning just like you. We'll be tearing down in a little bit. So I feel at home with you guys. This is where I feel more at church than in a big auditorium. So thanks for allowing me to be with you guys today. I'm so glad to be here. Let me give you a little background on me and why I stand before you today, and then we're going to take a journey through Scripture as we begin this idea of walking in an all-in kind of mindset. It's beautiful that you guys are in the midst of a transition to a new facility. What an incredible opportunity. But there are opportunities for you to move forward in your walk with Christ as well. And that's what happened in my life, my wife's life, and our children's life about 15 years ago. God began to move in our lives in a way that we were sitting in a service many times just like this, and in a Sunday school room like I was in earlier. And God began to call us and change our hearts, and eventually moved us from suburban Atlanta to plant a church in New York City. 11 years ago, we moved our lives, uprooted our lives, moved our 11 and 13-year-old child, took them out of their middle school and high school, and moved to New York City. And it's been amazing what God has done. We had a hand in planting 3 churches there and helping 5 other churches get started. But God is not just end us in that moment. If you think back, I don't remember how many years, maybe 9 years this church. How many years have you guys been going on here at East? Whatever you said. So you've been going on that many years, but there's a new chapter coming. There's the next chapter coming. And that's actually what's happening in my life and my wife's life right now. We are in the process of getting ready to leave New York City after 11 years of doing ministry, of raising kids there, not to go back, not to do something just to go back to comfort, but we're actually moving to a new area to focus on missions and church planting, and that's France. We're moving with the International Mission Board to help plant churches all around France, to be a part of that team. And the beautiful part of being able to stand in front of you today is Crosslife has partnered with us for many years to help us plant churches in New York City, and now will continue to help us as we partner and move to France. And I just want to start today by sharing some highlights about how your investment and your partnership has paid off over the years. In New York City, our last 11 years, our goal as church planters has been find places the gospel is not and go and interject our lives there. New York City has a population in the metro area of about 30 million. So you take Georgia out metro New York area, the city made up of people from over 800 different ethnic backgrounds, and we often describe it as very dense and diverse. In our neighborhood, in 8 square blocks of our neighborhood, there are over 400,000 people that live in 8 square blocks. 1,000 people live in my apartment building that I live in on the 26th floor. And while we describe it as dense and diverse, we also use 2 other words to often describe New York City, and it's dark and distant. Dark and distant from God. When we arrived in New York, less than 2% of the population would have identified as Christians or evangelical. And many people moved to New York to start over, right? To start over in careers, relationships, and even their basic identities. And many moved there to do the same in their spiritual lives. They leave behind what they grew up with, their connection to God that they had, and start a life focused around their self and success. And while this can create a very dark and difficult place, it also creates a beautiful opportunity for the gospel of Jesus to shine into a dark place. Believe it or not, my family, even though we grew up in metro Atlanta, have become New Yorkers. We love it. We don't drive. I have a 24 and a 26-year-old. They don't have a driver's license. They've never put a hand on the wheel of a car. They don't know what to do. When we go buy groceries, we buy them for the day. We don't buy them for the week or a month. If you said, hey, I want to bless you and take you to Sam's or Costco or Walmart and buy you groceries, I'd be like, great, but I don't have anywhere to put them. We don't have a pantry. I don't even have a place to put groceries in our little 700 square foot apartment. You think about tight living spaces. The four of us lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, 700 square feet, which meant my teenage boy and my teenage daughter shared a bedroom together for most of their high school years. That seems crazy to most of you, but it's life, and it's how we do life. We take the subway, we take the bus, we walk fast, we talk fast. We do a lot of things that New Yorkers do. We love the city. It's become part of who we are. Love the heartbeat of the city. And in this love for the city, we love the people of the city. Love the heartbeat of the city. But our love for Christ is what compels us to bring hope and healing there. When we moved to New York in 2013, we moved into a neighborhood where there was little to no Christian influence. We planted a church in our apartment, started in our living room. Our first Sunday that we met, we had a high attendance of 4 people, which was me, my wife, and my 2 children. They had to be there. They may not have been there if they didn't have to, but we started with 4. And over that time, God has multiplied that. And it's been beautiful to watch as we have now seen over 100 people come to faith in Christ through the ministry of that church and be baptized and step into an eternal relationship with Christ. We've seen hundreds other reconnect their spiritual lives and become reinvigorated for Christ. Most of those that we connect with come to Christ. They've come from an atheist or agnostic background. We've launched additional churches in areas of high need and lostness, and we continue to see God change lives. In 2019, Crosslife came on as one of our primary partners to help us launch a new congregation in downtown Manhattan in the financial district. And man, this was moving forward. We were getting ready to launch. Our launch date was set for April of 2020. We all know what happened about March of 2020. Life changed for everybody. We hit a little speed bump, right? And, I've shared one time I was here last year, a couple years ago, I shared the amazing opportunities that God gave us during COVID to open up many ministry opportunities in the city. We were able to raise over $500,000 to provide hot meals and groceries to people in high need. Yet God was faithful. Even though our church small group that I met with this morning, when we came back with just 10 people. 10 people. Most everybody had left the city and not come back, moved to other areas. But yet God has grown us back from 10 to almost where we were pre-COVID, and at the same time has allowed our church planting and multiplication efforts in downtown Manhattan to flourish as well. We now have about 40 people gathering in downtown Manhattan, and in August of 2024, God willing, there's no pandemic next year, we will launch fully a new church in downtown Manhattan thanks to the partnership of groups like Crosslife. You've sent teams, you've sent money to help us break ground in that area. And while God was doing that, God was also over that last year beginning to work in my heart and my wife Katie's heart to begin to take another step of faith that I mentioned earlier, and that being to move to even a more dark and difficult place, to the country of France. And we've traveled there over the years to do personal vacations and ministry as well. And I always love to see people's eyes when I tell them we're moving to France to do missions, because I get a little eye roll. That's a tough place, right? That's a really tough place. It may not be a tough place to live, but I want to tell you it's a very tough place to do ministry. If you don't know much about France and their history, 120 years ago, they chose to implement a fully secular government and approach to life in France. So 5 generations that have had a very secular, humanistic focus. You can imagine what that's done to the culture there. It's created a very distant and dark area as well. We call it New York City 2.0, the next level of darkness. And in the area we're going, it's a town of about 1 million people. And in that million, we know right now of only 4 churches that we would consider to be gospel teaching churches. 1 church for every 250,000 people. Can you believe that? I mean, I drove out here today and I passed multiple churches just to come to this church. And there are no churches there, and that's part of why God is calling us there. Now, how did we get there? Seems crazy to think about this. Our lives 15 years ago were similar to maybe how your lives look right now. Katie and I have been married about 15 years. We had 2 kids. We were living in our hometown. We were both working full-time. We were attending church, attending a small group. But now, 15 years later, We're uprooting our lives from our home country, and we're leaving the life as we know it behind. And many think a full-time call to missions like what we're doing is the all-in of the Christian faith. Like that's it. That's all in. But I want you to hear the truth this morning, that there is not a person here in this room that has surrendered their heart to Christ that isn't called to live all in. All in. I think too often we do one of two things with our faith. We either tend to make it too small in our life or think of it as too big in our life. When I talk about too small, we do this. We go, well, I'm a Christian, yeah. It's a label that I wear like everything else. I do this, I do that. I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I work here, I do this, I'm a student, I'm a Christian as well. And it's just a label that we put on. It's created some guardrails in our life, things we do and don't do, and ultimately we think it's given me a ticket to heaven, but it's given no real huge impact in our life. It's too small. But sometimes we look at it and it's too big, right? We think that following Jesus is going to end up with you moving to France or Africa or somewhere all around the world or doing something like what I'm talking about. And you look at that and go, that's too big, too much. God could never use me like that. And we shy away from a calling that God has placed on all of our lives. And the truth is this. Going all in isn't about having more or less faith. It is about taking a step in faith. Just a step forward. One step from where you are now, moving forward. That's getting all in. And our journey from our home in suburban Atlanta to living in France started with one step. I remember at the time I had lost a job. I was in a job transition around our neighborhood about 3 miles and just walk step by step. And on those walks, we would talk and pray and ask God. And as we were praying, we would often pray, all right, God, we'll do anything you want as long as we don't have to move, as long as our kids get to stay in the school they get in, as long as you provide this level of income, as long as you do this, we'll do whatever you want, right? So I realized as we were praying that spiritually, we were doing the same thing we were doing physically. We were walking in circles, around and around and around. I was getting some exercise, but I wasn't going anywhere. We finally, one day, God just broke into our lives, and we stopped and we prayed, all right, God, wherever, whatever, period. No conditions, open road, we'll go. And I'm not making this up. That was a Thursday. The next day, Friday, I get a call from the North American Mission Board that began our journey of church planting to New York. So if you just stop walking in circles in your neighborhood, God's going to move you to New York is the lesson for you today. No. But we do that in our life. We create these circles, these spiritual circles that we walk in, putting conditions on God, and we wonder why we're never experiencing growth. So today I want us to quickly look at how you and I can continue to move forward, to step forward in this journey of living all in. And I believe it takes two things to do that. It's letting go of some things and picking up some things. So the first thing I want you to see this morning is this. It is impossible to go all in when we refuse to let go of other things in our life. When we refuse to let go. It's a story in the Bible of Jesus calling his first disciples. It's found in many of the Gospels. We're going to read it briefly out of Matthew 4 today. This idea of when he first called Peter and his brothers to follow him. Look at Matthew 4:18. Should be on the screen, or you can have it in your Bibles as well. It says this, while working by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting their nets into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And immediately these two brothers left their nets and followed him. I want you to hear this morning. Deciding to go all in, to take a step, isn't the difficult part. The hard part is leaving our nets behind. Their livelihood, financial loss, a decision that would cost them. It meant leaving their identity as fishermen, their established goals and dreams. It meant leaving behind the hard work they had already put in to go and start something, a business, to go start something new. It meant leaving their comfort zone and trusting someone else, someone new. Nets that day, probably like nets today. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know this, but when I research about nets, there's few things that come to mind. One, they're heavy. These things, they take all your strength and ability to move them. This isn't a little nylon fishing net that they left behind. These were ropes, heavy nets. They're also a little fragile. They took constant need and attention and repair. They took a lot of their energy. And they were specific. They had one purpose: to catch fish, to provide sustenance for them and their family. Now, let's say that when Jesus called Peter and Andrew here, they would have said, yes, we're following you, but we're going to drag these nets behind us just in case. Just in case this doesn't work out. How ridiculous would they have looked following Jesus around the countryside, still pulling their nets behind them? But I think many of us following Jesus today are following him, but we're still dragging some of our nets behind him as we walk. Let me give you what some of those maybe were in my life, and maybe they were in you. One of the nets we carry is the net of doubt, because we don't believe the promises of God. I can tell you, doubt is one of the largest nets that we are tempted to carry in our life. As soon as I start talking about the idea of God, maybe God's calling you to missions, to take a step, to move forward, to leave something behind. But doubts. I want to be honest, as soon as my wife and I began to think of, doubt came pouring in. It opened up in our minds, and that's all that was consuming my thoughts. We've never done anything like this before. I've never started a church. What would I do? I don't even know how to do that. What would it do to our kids? We're taking our kids out of the schools that we went to as when we were teenagers and moving them to New York City. And everything you see on the news from the South about New York City is, I guess I would have to get them bulletproof vests. I'm going to have to, crazy stuff. Not a good picture. How can we afford this? When we moved to New York, the average rent of an average apartment was $3,000 a month. That was 11 years ago. It's over $4,000 now. I'm like, how can we do this? We own a house. We'd have to sell it, pay off debt. We have no resources. We don't even have jobs in New York City. My wife's a dental hygienist. Her license from Georgia would not transfer to New York. She would have to go through that process again. What would other people think? Why would anybody listen to a guy from Georgia in New York City? All of these doubts. Or maybe there'll be a better time in the future. Once the kids are graduated, then maybe we could do something like this. But I can tell you, every one of these doubts plus others came into our minds. And it boiled down to the fact that we were carrying around the net of doubt. Doubting that God could do something, would do something, that he could use us and would use us. We didn't think that his plans included us. Didn't think that. And I remember as we were drawing closer to actually moving to New York City, I woke up one night literally in a cold sweat. Could not sleep, just fear, anxiety. And I remember crying out to God, I can't do this. I can't. I was ready to shut it all down. We were a month and a half away from moving. We had sold our house, sold everything, and I was like, no, we're going back. I can't do this. And it was like God took me by the shoulders and shook me that night and said, you're right, you can't, but I can. You can't, but I can. And this verse came to my mind out of Matthew 6. It says this, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you'll put on it. These were all things I was worried about. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? And as this verse came into my life, so did the peace of God and allowed us to drop the nets of doubt. Every doubt was answered. When we talked to the kids about moving, we thought they would be a detriment, and they said, an impediment, and they said, no, why wouldn't we do this? And we were like, well, you're the reason we're not going to do it. But there's a no, we're in. We had our house sold and our debt paid off in just over 2 months. Through generous gifts, we had a year's worth of New York City rent in the bank before we moved up there. We had 30 different churches that were willing to support us in some different way, and over 100 individuals that said, we're willing to financially support you. God, when we dropped the nets of doubt, God poured in his provision and his promises. One of the most meaningful moments of our life in New York came just this past January when we celebrated our 10th anniversary. Our family, just the four of us, went out to eat, had a nice dinner, and we're sitting around reminiscing and talking about things. And again, I told you my kids are in their 20s now. Moved when they were in middle school and high school to New York. And as we were sharing, both of our kids said to us, "Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking us and modeling for us what it is to live a life, not just of faith, but that's willing to change and to live the unexpected." And I can't tell you how much of a gift was that to us, that God, that our kids, can I tell you how many people I've met that have tried to do what we've done? And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but their kids, everybody's on a different journey, but I can't tell you how much of a gift that was for us to God. And I think a large reason was because we let go of our doubts and held on to his provision. The quickest way to get rid of doubt in our lives is to actually do something that requires faith. Doubting. There's a second net that we should drop, and it's the net of self-reliance, because it's the idea that we don't believe the power of Jesus. All right, so I'm going to do this, but I'm going to make some plans. I'm going to now I'm going to take it on me to do everything. In the midst of trying to follow God, trust God, and love God, we hold on to the second net of self-reliance, the thing it's up to me to make everything happen. And man, did I do this when we got to New York. I thought it was up to me to make everybody in that city a Christian. Like immediately. Like I moved in to an apartment building, and I thought, well, within the first week, I will know everybody on my floor. In the first month, I'll know everybody in the building. Man, after the first year, I'll be walking around my neighborhood like, Bobby, Joe, how everybody. Can I tell you, after 2 months of living there, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know a soul. And it was so overwhelming, and I was so frustrated with my efforts. I was like, what am I not doing, God? What am I not doing? What do I need to do more of? And again, it was another one of those shake you by the shoulders moment, and he said, nothing. And I was like, no. He was like, no, stop trying to do more and start trusting me more. Listen, he's like, when's the last time you asked me what it is that you should do? What to open a door for you versus trying to open it yourself. And man, that changed our mindset. It reminds me this week I've been flying a lot back and forth, and you sit in an airplane, and I realized last night I was flying back down here from Atlanta, and I realized last night I have no clue how this plane works. Zero idea. Maybe some of you are pilots in here and you know. I just know that if I get on this thing, it's going to eventually land here in Orlando, and I'm going to get all I'm supposed to do. There are things I'm not supposed to pack in my bag when I go through security, or I'm going to get in trouble. I know I'm supposed to buckle up and keep my seat upright and put my tray table up. I know those things. I know there are things that I am supposed to do, but honestly, that adds zero value to me getting on what the plane does. I still think you can actually use your cell phone on the plane. I don't know why that. Anyways, but there are things that you're not supposed to do and you do. But there's a whole different side of things, whole different group of people that are actually making that plane do what it's supposed to do. And in our lives, too often I try to be the pilot of a plane I don't even know how to fly and doesn't even know how it flies. And instead of relying on myself, we have to learn to rely on God. And it reminds me of this verse out of Matthew 7 that says this: ask and it will be given, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks will be opened. God's not keeping resources from us. He is taking us and flying us and putting us in places that we can't ever imagine. And the quickest way to rid ourselves of self-reliance is to actually embrace our brokenness. I'm not good enough. That's why I need grace and mercy. That's why we say, all hail King Jesus. The word hail there actually means a submission. You're submitting to him. You're acknowledging him as the authority, as the king, and I'm not it. And it's us acknowledging that in our brokenness. Well, there's a third net. It's the last net, and it's the net of shame, because we don't believe the purpose of Jesus. We often carry the net of shame because we don't believe the purpose of Jesus. And man, can this one eat us up. Past things in my life, the things that make me unworthy, unlovable, unforgivable, My life is filled with poor choices that created brokenness. My character is flawed. I can never do anything good. Man, I've experienced damaging circumstances. I don't have the strength to move forward. We pack our bags of regret, hurt, pain, bitterness, anger, and we just carry them around like nets. It becomes our baggage, and it holds us back. We're not even like Andrew and Peter, who willingly say, I'll follow. He's like, I can't even follow. Shame keeps us back. Our past, what we think, will keep us behind from following Jesus. And the truth is, what was the purpose of Christ? To set us free, to live a perfect life, to be a perfect offering, to overcome the sin and shame that we experience. A few months ago, Katie and I were at our interview conference for the International Mission Board as we were on the journey getting ready to go to France. And we were walking around. We walk a lot. We were walking around the campus that night, and she just started crying. I was like, what's going, it's an emotional time, a lot of stuff going on. And she said, I feel so unworthy. I feel so unworthy to do this. Why do we get to do this? Why does God choose us to do something like this? And it broke my heart too, is that feeling of like, this is not me proving myself to God. It's actually God in the depths of our brokenness and our weakness making himself strong. I want you to hear this. He does not need you to do something for him, but he wants to do something through you. Your life, your story, your journey from brokenness to hope and healing is the story that this world needs to hear about Christ. Matthew 11 tells us this, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, with guilt and shame, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The quickest way to rid yourselves of shame is to savor your salvation. You've been saved. You've been saved. The guilt, the shame, it's gone. It has new purpose. And that purpose is to redeem. So when we're free, our hands are free, what do? We're supposed to pick up something because it's impossible to go all. And what does he tell us to pick up? Matthew 16 tells us, if anyone come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Deciding to go all in, we said, is not just the difficult part, the decision. The hard part's leaving the nets, but the harder part is picking up your cross. Picking up your cross. Dropping our nets and following him, it's a tough part, but man, actually walking in the cross. Think about it. What was the cross for? The cross was for criminals. It was for humiliation. It was for pain. We wear it around our neck now as a symbol of our faith. But when he was telling his disciples this, they were like, it'd be like us putting around an electric chair around our neck right now. They're like, why would you do that? They didn't know that he was going to redeem that. But he said, you need to take up your cross. And here's what we need to take up. Going all in requires that we accept his lordship. Deny ourselves, right? If anyone comes after me, pursue to walk with him. It starts with the denial of ourselves. This means letting go, but also picking up new desires and directions. Last night I was at we were celebrating my nephew's wedding, and I was talking to a friend of mine there who's in ministry, and we were telling them we were moving to France, and he said, I could never do that. God would have to speak to me audibly to do that. I was like, all right, I get it, But I said, why? Why wouldn't you do it? And he said, just to be honest, I'm too comfortable where I'm at. And I said, all right, we all like a little bit of comfort. I said, but if God's not calling you to France, where's he calling you to? Because God may not be calling you to France. If he is, please let me know. Come on, join us. But if he's not calling you there, guess what? He's calling you somewhere to do something. This is what giving into his lordship means as we start taking directions and movements from him. But going all in also requires us to embrace his example. It says to take up your cross. This idea of looking to follow what he did, to live a life of consequence. Can I tell you, if you are taking up the life of a Christ follower, your life, your story will not be simple. It will not be quiet or boring. Your life will have impact. It will make a splash. It will leave a mark on you. It's done in New York and even in France. The truth is, the real power is in individuals. Right now, I'm praying and walking with a guy named Anthony in our congregation. Anthony is a prison guard at Rikers Island. He's become a good friend of mine. We've gotten to know each other the last year and a half. 3 weeks ago, he came to church for the first time. 3 weeks. After a year and a half of knowing him and building a relationship with him, and I was teaching on meekness. I was like, what better topic for a prison guard than meekness? And then he showed up 2 weeks later, last week, and I was preaching on mercy. And I was like, man, that is not what he gets in his real life at work. But you know what? It is changing his soul. We're praying that God would see men like Anthony, my other friends like Kelly and Mark and Pat come to Christ. It's not about saying we're doing France or New York City. It's about the individuals in your life. Think about the individuals that Jesus changed their life. That's following his example. And it's finally going all in will require us to believe the impossible. Take up your cross and follow me. What did he do with that cross? He died on it. That's not the end of the story, is it? He was buried, rose again, overcoming death, the impossible. You and I, when we walk all in, we can experience the impossible in our life. And the fact is, we've equated knowledge of Jesus and of the Bible to following Jesus. We've made going to church service equal to surrendering our hearts and minds to our Savior. We've made reading the Bible and praying synonymous with authenticity and intimacy, our dependence upon him and the Spirit of God that dwells in our hearts. It's about allowing and redemption and restoration that he has to offer. It's stepping into a world and sharing the hope and healing with them that you and I have experienced. It seems impossible that God would use a family from suburban Atlanta to start a church in New York City and eventually move to France to take the gospel to a country where it's not being spoken. It's impossible. If you would have told me that 15 years ago, I'd have said, impossible. But it started with a step, one step. So my question to you today, will you take a step? Simple step. I'm not asking you to even take a leap. Maybe the step for you, if you've been a part of this church for a while and you've been sitting here enjoying it, maybe as you move to this new location, to step into leading, into serving, finding a place to plug in that you haven't plugged in before. There's going to be all kinds of new needs at the new facility. So to step into serving, step into leading. Maybe it's stepping into your neighbor's yard, introducing yourself, finding out where they are in their faith journey, beginning to connect with people that are already around you and making the good news of Christ known. For some of you today, it may be stepping into faith for the very first time, coming to understand who Jesus is and what he offers you. And it's hope and healing like you've never experienced before. It all starts with a step. So you simply take a step today. Will you bow your head and close your eyes with me? As we come to a chance to respond through worship, through prayer, I'm going to ask you a very simple question this morning, and it's this. Would you take a step of faith? A moment when the band plays and they sing, the altar would be open if you want to actually step out and come forward and pray and just say, God, I need to drop nets in my life. I need to drop doubt, shame, and self-reliance. There are things that you need to let go here, and you just need to lay it on the altar. Say, God, I'm done with this. I'm done doubting you. I'm done trying it in my own strength. I'm done thinking I am too broken to be used. Maybe you need to pick up some things this morning. Come to this altar and grab hold of the impossible. You can't even imagine right now, and you don't know what it is. You don't even know what you're committing to. You're just committing to follow. Pick up that cross and follow. And maybe you need to come this morning and step into faith for the very first time. You can come and meet God at this altar. You can meet him at your seat. There'll be people along the sides that you will pray with you. If you need that, this moment is yours. And I invite you to respond to God however you desire. Oh, Father, thank you that you are a God who calls us to drop our nets. Oh, I carried them for too long. Too long. They didn't bring fulfillment. They didn't bring joy. God, they just held me back. Thank you for the call to drop. And you gave me so much more. So much. More than I could ever hope and dream of. So God, may we as your people today come before you with all of our hearts. Step all in to what it means to follow you wherever you lead.